Before we get to the podcast show, I wanted to make sure you knew about my physical therapist entrepreneur course. If you want to learn how to get started adding additional income streams as a physical therapist, writer, author, social media video host, trainer, consultant, or course educator, this course is for you. Head to brian-schwabe-dpt.teachable.com and use promo code podcast for 60% off today. Hey everyone, welcome back to Brian's Corner, the Student Physical Therapist. My name is Brian Schwabe. I'm your host. And in today's episode, we are with Marco Lopez, who is a physical therapist and a certified strength industry specialist. He's a co-founder of the Basketball Doctors and is currently a physical therapist in Los Angeles. Marco, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me on, man. I started following you guys, the Student Physical Therapist, back in, I think it was like 2015 when we were like in the cardiopulmonary section at USC, and it was like so boring. I was just you found your website and just started looking at some of the orthopedic stuff because I was like dead set on orthopedics. But thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I don't know a cardiopulm. That was not my favorite class, and I think my colleagues on the Student Physical Therapist would agree with that too. For some of our viewers out there who have not met you before, I know you have a big following on Instagram right now. You have probably 20,000. But for those that haven't met you or known about you, can you tell us a little bit about your background into PT and how basketball has become part of your mission and your passion?
Yeah, man. So I grew up in Los Angeles, California. So I grew up playing basketball pretty much my entire life. You know, we played in AAU circuit, high school, but all throughout the time, I'd always get hurt for some reason. It's like sometimes freaking injuries. Like one of them, like I broke my wrist trying to guard a screen, just crazy stuff like that. So that kind of led me into a passion in the sports medicine field. I didn't really like school, like to be honest with you. I mean, I just like playing sports. And then I was like, hey, why not? If I'm going to go to school, might as well just major in something that I like doing, which is like athletics. You know, I like the human body. So all those injuries kind of set me up to go to school at USC for undergrad. And in undergrad, still playing basketball, I was like, hey, you know what? I kind of want to try out for the basketball team. So when I wanted to try out, started training really hard right before getting into USC, fractured my ankle. And then I was like, all right, this is the last bit. I was like, there's like a meaning behind this. And then in undergrad, I started talking with a lot of other mentors, and they were saying, hey, you have a passion for basketball and, you know, the whole rehab thing. Why don't you just look into like athletic training or physical therapy or orthopedics, you know? So I went in there thinking about I was going to do sports medicine, orthopedics, pre-med route. Then I volunteered with the student athletic training program at USC. And I worked with the football team during the glory days in 2011 with the Lane Kiffin, but we did well those years. We beat UCLA 50-0. But throughout that time, I kind of got exposed to several career paths. And athletic training wasn't my thing. I was just too much time on the field. I love the sport, but I thought it was too much. One thing that really caught my attention was like the physical therapy realm. It was just like you were in the training room, but you were just actually rehabbing the people. You were doing some on the field stuff, but it was more performance stuff. It was really cool. So that kind of got me thinking. I started volunteering other places, and then started shadowing a physical therapist full time at USC, working with the volleyball team, Dr. Lisa Nassetti, and she's also USC grad. And that really kind of affirmed me as like, hey, I want to go into physical therapy. And the whole thing is I wanted to go into basketball, but I didn't want to help out with the basketball team because I was going to be too involved with the sport and I wouldn't really pay attention. So I did volleyball, which is the next closest landing sport, you know, all ankle injuries, knee injuries. So it was really, you know, gained a lot of information on there. And I was like, hey, this is what I really want to do. Then went to PT school, still played basketball. We were playing recreationally basketball and still would get hurt. I remember I sprained my ACL in grad school the night before our big practical week in USC. So it was pretty wild. Like I remember sending a message to one of our professors, and I was like, hey, I think I might have messed up my knee. And everyone was playing in our team. It was like the intramural physical therapy program. And they're like, yeah, Marco, I think he tore his ACL or something. But I just sprained it, but I was like, I can't even walk. So couldn't take my practicals until because I literally couldn't walk until I think 3 more weeks. It was pretty wild. But that all kind of set up into my passion for basketball. Was like experienced all these injuries, and I always wanted to get back to playing basketball. And I was like, this is kind of what I want to specialize in. And that's what I kind of just kind of started doing my clinicals near with athletes and started just learning on my own more basketball specific stuff. It's like, hey, we know as physical therapists, we know biomechanics, we know the anatomy. Let's just observe the movement and try to fix those movements. And that's kind of where I got to become a physical therapist. I think it just started with the love of the game, and then I just continually getting hurt. And I was like, you know what? Let me just try to help out other people not get hurt, or if they get hurt, let's help them recover and get back to playing basketball.
That's cool, man. Basketball is one of those sports, and you and me both have that same passion.
Yeah.
But basketball is one of those sports where it's not like baseball, where there's all this research and we know about these little league rules and everything like that. It's kind of the wild, wild west a little bit, especially with AAU circuits. And all seen some of the articles that have come out on ESPN, which has been awesome because it's starting to expose some of those overuse injuries and some of the high demands of these younger athletes now that they're playing so much more than they used to, but there's not as much quality information out there. So I think it's really cool that you've kind of taken that next step and started your own company, the Basketball Doctors, to at least educate some of the public. Can you tell us a little bit more about, how that started and your mission behind it and whatnot?
Yeah. So back to another crazy injury. So graduated USC in 2017 and consistently playing basketball now. Like, I'm pretty healthy. I feel good. And one day it was literally 3 weeks before my board exam. I was going up for a block and someone lands on my knee and my knee snaps. Tore my ACL, MCL, meniscus, had a bone fracture, patella dislocated. It was my leg was bruised up. It was bad. And I knew right then, the first thing that came to my mind, I was like, damn, I got board exams in 3 weeks. I am screwed. So that kind of started the whole idea, because once that happened, I contacted my buddy, co-founder Gabe, and I was like, dude, you wouldn't believe it, because we were going to play a game next week. He's like, dude, I think I tore my ACL. And he said, no way. And I was like, man, yeah. So, I had so much time. I didn't take the board exam that thing because I literally couldn't sit down. My knee was just so swollen and there was too much going in my mind. I was like, what's the next step? I can't work now because I was going to start the next week as, at a part-time, when you have your, not your license, but I forgot what the term is.
PTLA.
PTLA. So I was literally going to start the next week and now I can't work, could barely put weight on my leg. So that got me thinking. I was like, damn, I had so much time in my hands. So I was like, went online and tried to find like basketball rehab or information on basketball rehab, injury prevention stuff, because I wanted to get back to playing basketball. That was my goal. I was like, I'm a physical therapist. I need to get back to doing it. And I couldn't find anything online. No information specifically for basketball. So I contacted my buddy Gabe and I was like, hey man, I had this crazy idea. I couldn't find any basketball stuff like return to sport, because I want to make sure I could get back to the basketball court and find the quality information that's going to help myself and other future people. And I couldn't find it. So I called up Gabe and I was like, hey, do you want to create this? And he's like, yeah, man, let's talk about it. And we started creating it and launching it. And that's kind of where it started. It's like, hey, we wanted to just create some information to help other people. Our whole goal is to empower the basketball community with evidence-based information regarding injuries, rehab, performance, and just to help people play basketball for the rest of their lives. Because we've met so many people like myself. I was like, hey, am I ever going to play basketball again after this injury? Is it even worth it? But I was like, no, I want to be able to play for the rest of my life. And that's our goal, is like, let's help people play basketball for the rest of their life. We're not thinking about short term, we're thinking about long term, be able to play. Because a lot of people hang it up too early. And I was like, after this injury, I was like, nah, I need to get back onto the court. So we just started filming some, our hope, the first goal of the Instagram was like, let's just get more basketball athletes into our clinics, because we worked part-time at our clinics. Once I was able to rehab, I think I was like 2.5 months, I was like, I feel pretty comfortable with my knee. That was the worst idea. Every day after work, my knee would just blow up. It wasn't ready. But that's what kind of started the idea. I was like, let's just get more basketball people. Let's just get some clients into our practice. We didn't think about private practice. Like, let's just see more basketball people and bring information out there. If there's people that come in, they come in, but let's just educate everyone about it and just provide a platform that we could help people that don't have the sources for rehab or anything like that they could use that per se. And then it just started growing and growing and growing. And now it's been exactly, I think, 2 years, because I remember we were going to launch in Coachella weekend 2018. and I had tickets to go see Eminem, and I was like, dude, I need to go see him. I was like, we're not ready. And that's when I thought, I was like, we're actually gonna take this serious, because I skipped Coachella for this 2 years ago. So that's where we're at in regards to it. Kind of started. It started with an injury of myself, and I was like, hey, I want to give back. And there was like a lack of sources online, and I was like, hey, let's just create something fun. And now we're just growing and growing, and then want to help as many basketball players as they can get back to playing basketball and play pain free.
Nice. That's awesome, man. You know, you start a platform like you have. You obviously have tons of videos. Where do you see this going, and how do you find that way to navigate trying to educate those basketball players? Because you know, you took a good platform, because these younger players, they're all on Instagram. They're all like videos. So you obviously took the right approach to that. Where do you see that going in the next, 2 to 5 years? And how do you feel like you're going to distribute some of that educational content?
Yeah. So like you said, I think what it came down to, we were trying to find our right avatar, because I think in the beginning we were just trying to do like all scientific information, like all evidence, show up this journal article and everything. And we noticed that's not really our target audience. We are going to show some other clinicians, but we want to help the masses, like the basketball players. That's our athletes. So sometimes we got caught up in going into the more scientific reasoning, instead of just like, hey, let's make it relatable for the athlete itself. That's our audience. So that's what kind of switched over, like you said, doing more videos, less explanation, but still have an explanation, but target them more. And that's why we even switched over to TikTok. I think we mentioned this last when we originally met. I was like, TikTok for us, it's all that now. All the high school athletes are in TikTok, and so we've been growing our TikTok pretty big. And it's quick little videos, and we just give them tips every day. Our thing is like a TikTok a day keeps the basketball player pain free. So it's like a bunch of little TikToks, but our goal in the next 2 years is we're going to be launching a lot of programs for these players to help them be able to return from an injury back to pre-injury levels. So meaning, like, I know a lot of them is like, hey, I hurt my ankle, man. I used to be able to dunk. I used to be able to move quick, but ever since his injury, it's still not right. Because there's a huge gap per se once they get cleared, and then they're like, hey, you're on your own. But we want to make sure they're able to move correctly, land correctly, jump correctly, not only to get back to their performance levels prior, but also reduce the risk for future injuries. Obviously, we can't prevent any injury, but we could reduce the risk for a lot of the injuries. I mean, there's gonna be freak injuries like mine. Someone just fell on my knee. I don't know how much, glute strength I could have for someone, withstand that crazy contact injury. But that's our goal with a lot of the programs that we're launching in the next couple months per se, by the end of the year, that we're trying to help out as many basketball players as we can. And throwing a plug in for yours, I mean, we took that course of yours for sports consulting, and we want to jump into that realm, helping out basketball clubs. Because like you mentioned, growing up as well, I just constantly played basketball. I know my high school basketball coach got mad if I would skip spring basketball, if I wanted to play a different sport or something. It was like basketball year round. I mean, we played in a competitive league, but it was like, you're constantly playing basketball. There's no other sport that you can. So I think, like I mentioned to you, Brian, it's just like, hopefully every AAU basketball team has a physio with them, helping them prevent injuries, monitor some of the load, just seeing some characteristics that we kind of view as injury prone that we could kind of help out in the beginning. So that's kind of where we want to move our services to. And then eventually, I mean, we're looking at, hopefully, fingers are crossed, hopefully this whole coronavirus, we're looking at a couple big gyms that we might lease out to kind of start seeing more private clients and just focus just on the basketball athlete itself. That's kind of where we're at for the next 2 years.
Very cool. Very cool. I think that's great. And I think where you're going with that, especially trying to educate more and more of the players, but also trying to get the coaches involved with that as well. That's great, because, if you can tackle the coaching side of things, then it's going to just trickle down to the players as well, right? Because again, we talked about this in the past too, there's different stakeholders with return to sport. There's different stakeholders with, just performance in general, right? And every single person is going to be a different conversation. So understanding those stakeholders, understanding where they're coming from, and especially when you have a background in basketball, that really helps, because you speak basketball language, right? So that's not going to be an issue for you. It's okay, how do I reach the high school kids? Well, they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram. I'm doing those things now. Now I'm going to create programs. Now I'm going to target some of the coaches and the players and the parents, right? And again, this is what we talked about with the consulting stuff, right? You're targeting these audiences so that you can ultimately get your main goal, which is to help basketball players. So I
Exactly.
think it's great, and I think that the avenues you're going is going to be great. And again, it's an uphill battle. We know that, but it's possible. And baseball is a perfect example of that, because baseball has been able to influence the little leaguers now when they actually have these rules, and you have major doctors like James Andrews, Dr. Elatrosh, big physical therapists like Mike Reinold that are doing these things. But we don't have a face yet for basketball. We have lots of great basketball physios out there, and we've all talked with them as well. But I think that's the next, up and coming thing, is to actually get a face out there to do these things.
Yeah, no, 100% agree what you said. And it's like one of the things that we faced is, yeah, we could attack the athlete, but I think the biggest thing that we're going to be able to get through the athlete is through their support system, like you mentioned, the coaches, the parents. So that's why we also started a Facebook group for parents, for youth basketball parents, to kind of talk to them about why it's important for this, like just basic stuff like injury prevention tools and stuff like that, because we want to, like you said, help as many basketball players. There isn't like in baseball, there's not a pitch count in basketball. There's not how many games you could play. But as we talked about this when you came on the podcast, all these overuse injuries. I mean, we get so many people with these overuse injuries, and it's just they're constantly playing. I know some of the people that we train, they come to us after like, hey, yeah, I had 2 hours with our skills trainer. We had 2 basketball games, and they come to me. They're like, hey, let's work on some performance and rehab. I was like, man, these guys can't even move, and they're like eating hot Cheetos on the way here. And I was like, it's just crazy how basketball is now turning into this kind of like the baseball epidemic, where it's like they're playing, different games constantly, and we're just seeing overuse injuries all the time. And we, like you said, hopefully we could collaborate with other people and just create just a face or just something for people to just use as a resource to kind of guide the way they coach, or guide the way they play in regards to injuries, player injuries.
100%. So to piggyback off of that, what do you feel then is the biggest challenge the younger players are facing right now? What's the hardest thing to get through to them from an injury prevention performance standpoint?
I mean, that's a great question. One of the things that I tell people, I think we mentioned this, it's like injury prevention isn't sexy.
Yeah.
It's not, it doesn't sell. I mean, honestly, like we kind of tell, like we have a bunch of kids, like currently we're working with one kid that he moves well, does everything well, but he moves like a basketball player. I mean, he moves like a basketball player. You'll go into like little dynamic valgus. It's normal, a little excessive, but he's so elastic and he moves so fluidly. But it's hard to kind of navigate those grounds where we want to mitigate the risk for injury, but we also don't want to harm the performance, because that's going to harm the way they psychologically think. They're like, hey, I'm not going to be able to jump 38 inches again off the ground. Why, so that's kind of like the tough thing that it's a tough sell that we face as physios. Be like, hey, well, we're trying to get you both, get a best of both worlds. We're trying to mitigate some of the risk factors, but also maintain your performance or even improve it. But I think the hardest thing is, like we mentioned, it's like everyone wants performance. You want a fast car. You want your car to go 160 miles an hour, but don't you want your brakes to be able to stop that car at 160 miles an hour? So that's kind of the uphill battle that we face. And all the kids that we've seen, and a lot of the injuries like people kind of tell us about and just constantly talk to us about, like, hey, what do I do for this? What do I do for that? It always has to do with like some sort of tendinopathy, tendonitis, just overuse injury that we're seeing. And then also just a lot of the players, they're not doing proper strength conditioning on the side. They're just playing basketball. Like I know when I was growing up, I never went to the weight room. It was just like, how am I going to get better? Let's just go back into the gym and then jump all this and not be able to absorb the force, have strength to be able to combat that force that you're landing and overuse injury. So that's kind of like the hill that we see as physios, I think, as we talked about. It's just, we have to be able to kind of communicate with the players, be like, hey, this is how we're going to help you. And it's going to help you long term. Because I mean, they're not going to want to do something that's not going to improve their performance. Maybe the older guys, yeah, the older guys are like, they know the importance. Like, hey, I want to stay in the league. A lot of the semi-pro guys that we work with are like, hey, I want to be able to play multiple years. But the high school kids and everything are like, no, they're thinking short terms. Like, I want to make varsity next year. I want to be able to dunk. Coach said if I could dunk, I could get into the varsity team. So it's stuff like that we kind of view as an uphill battle.
Yeah, the way I usually explain it to players, especially the younger ones, is it's kind of like I say it's kind of like NBA 2K with the attributes, right?
Yeah.
If I were to say it from my childhood, I'd say Showtime because that's what I used to play.
Just,
Yeah, really old school there.
yeah.
But I'll say it's like the attributes in NBA 2K, right? If you want to increase speed and power, right, you can do those things, but you can't increase all of them at the same time, right? There's going to be a risk of doing that, right? So there's always that risk reward, right? But then more importantly, what is your player box, right? Are you trying to fit a square in a round hole? It's not always going to work. There's some players that are just not built for speed necessarily, right?
Yeah.
And hammer speed constantly might not work for them, right? They might be, you have a guy right now, you just said that's more elastic and more flexible and able to be more fluid, right? There's other players that are more stiff, but that stiffness is to their advantage as well, right? So it's figuring out those attributes and figuring out, okay, what can I improve and what's going to go down as a result? Because something's going to go down a little bit, okay?
Yeah.
So trying to figure out that approach of, okay, on that seesaw, what's going to go up, what's going to go down, and what am I trying to achieve risk reward wise, right? And the players tend to get that if you can put it in their perspective. So I think there's a million different ways to do it, but you're 100% right. You have to go after performance for them so they understand the effects of injury prevention as well.
Yeah, and like you said, I like how you said it's like you're navigating these two grounds. Be like, all right, we'll increase this, but we're also gonna have to decrease this, or it's just like, and it all comes down to, I think, what the person wants at the end. Like, hey, what's your goal? And then like, hey, all right, let's work around your goals and everything. Because I mean, sometimes like when I was like coming out of grad school, I was like, hey, I'm gonna do this with my patients, like physical therapy. I want to do this, do that, and sometimes they're like, hey, I don't really care about that. I just want to be able to jump. I was like, damn, you get too excited sometimes. You're like, you sometimes get in your own mind. You're like, hey, I want them for this for them. But sometimes it all comes down to what do they want? That's who's going to pay us. That's who's going to guide us. And that's going to keep their motivation. But I think that was my biggest mistake as a early clinician, like right away. It's like, even for regular people, regular weekend warriors, like I want them to run. Even for my seniors, like I want them to get them as strong as they can. It's like, I'm okay. I might be able to lift my groceries now. I feel fine. It's like, I guess that's the farthest we could go. And that's where I kind of learned, is like, you've got to first find out what the athlete wants and then have their needs analysis and then be like, all right, let's work together.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. And I think a lot of clinicians make that mistake. Even performance trainers do too.
Yeah.
It's similar to like a helicopter parent, right? Who
Yeah.
vicariously through their kid, right? They want things, but you have to almost separate that emotion and say, okay, what is, from an objective standpoint, what do we actually need to focus on, and what are their goals? And then we work backwards, just like return to sport. We work backwards to explain to them, these are milestones you have to hit for your goal of return to running, return to sprinting, return to jumping. So we can still play that role and help them do some of those things that we want them to do as well. But explaining that, hey, we're going to hit these certain things for you to perform the way you want to perform.
Yeah.
Those go hand in hand.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So I always ask people this toward the end of this: where do you see yourself in anywhere from 5 to 10 years? Like what does your ideal career look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's the one thing that kind of keeps on changing. At first, when I first went into, when I started practicing, I wanted to work in the NBA. It was like my go-to. It's like, hey, I need to work in the NBA. That's why we kind of started the basketball docs. One of the things like, hey, let's work in the NBA. Now it started kind of shifting. So now we're working more on, yeah, I kind of like doing this whole platform thing. I enjoy, like we talked about, I enjoy the whole just creating a brand. So our goals now, specifically my goals for the next 5 to 10 years, we want to have our own practice, our own little space where we're seeing basketball athletes come in. Maybe only open 3 days a week, maybe, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, also Saturdays. And we also are going to see some other patients as well, but that's going to be our main focus, a area where it's going to be rehab, performance, and like a recovery center as well, where they come in like, hey, I've had a long, let's look at some of the things. So it's kind of creating like a one-stop shop for the basketball athlete in regards to that. That's kind of where we see ourselves. Like, I want to have that space clinic, or where it's just constantly for basketball players, and then just continue growing our brand. I mean, what we want to do is hopefully down the line, where the basketball doctors, we have a bunch of collaborators and a lot of physical therapists that we meet, and we've collaborated with a bunch of strength coaches. That way someone hits us up, an athlete contacts us, hey, because a bunch of them do contact us, hey, I'm in New York, I'm in Florida, who do you recommend? So we don't know that many people in New York. We're getting to know more people, but having a network of people to help other basketball athletes. So kind of having like a one-stop shop. they'll come in like, hey, who do you recommend? It's like, oh, I know Brian, I know so and so, he's out of, you know, Burbank, or, you know, whatever, just to help the greater good of the basketball athlete, because we can't help everyone. I mean, there's millions of people. We can only help the people that, you know, that are in our area, and we're doing more virtual stuff as well. But for some people that need to have that hands-on, one-on-one, we want to have the brand where it's like we have a list of what we call not trusted, but basketball doctors affiliates, or people that contributors that we've met through, you know, our PT careers recommended. That way we could easily recommend other uh, patients to them or athletes, and create like a brand and kind of a lifestyle where it's like, hey, you know, I got injured, I'm gonna check out the basketball doctors, see what advice they have, and then we recommend and go from there. So it's kind of like a little go to more management of the basketball athlete. I think the best way, I would say.
That's a great way to put it. And I think you're beyond where we need to be in physical therapy, because there's enough for everybody. And it's one of those things where you need to be able to collaborate as much as possible. And I feel like sometimes physical therapists, or at least it seems like this at least from an online perspective,
Yeah.
don't want to work together as much in our field, but other fields do a great job of that. And that's the only
Yeah.
way to get things done. And I think you can't see everybody. So you need to have trusted advisors. You need to have other people that you work with. That's how you learn as well, right? You have to be able to collaborate with not only people inside of your own company, but outside of your company too, for the purpose of yourself, as well as the purpose of helping the people you want to help, which is in your case, basketball players. So that's great.
Yeah. That's the goal. I think it's I mean, when we sign, you know, when we do our oath, you know, we have to do it for the athlete itself. You know, we're at the end of the goal, it's the athlete himself. The way I kind of think about it is, I wish I had someone when I was growing up, a physio that could guide me through the injuries that I had, and probably would have had a different basketball career for sure. I don't know if I would have gone to USC for sure, not D1, but would have gone somewhere. But that's kind of our main goal, is like help out as many as we can, even if we can't help them out, point them in the direction that we can, because there's so many people that need our help as physios, because we know so much about the biomechanics, the human body, and everything. And as long as you have a passion for the sport that we talked about, like we do, or even if you just look at the sport, like I like just watching basketball. So like the Jordan documentary is great, the way he moves and everything is just fascinating. And once we know how they move, how the sport plays, we could kind of speak the language. Like, oh, you know, you're doing this, you're doing like a little breakdown or whatever, you know, little side shuffle. But I think the eventual goal is just, let's help out everyone. And that's how our profession is going to grow. Because the more people we help, they're like, oh, physios actually know the human body. Because I know half the time they're like, hey, I don't know, do you know what to do with this? It's like, I don't want to be cocky. It's like, hey, I'm a physio, man. I was in school for 3 years. Like, of course I know what to do with that. But, you know, stuff like that, where it's, if we could show our value in the basketball realm, and that's what we're trying to promote. Like, hey, physios have value in the basketball community. That's, I mean, the eventual mission to do our profession. Because I want to be able to, you know, go anywhere where it's like, hey, physios know basketball and they could help us out in basketball, as opposed to just like, they don't know what they're doing when it comes to basketball, you know?
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. Listen, this is why I do this. This is why I like getting people like you on the show, just to talk about different sporting PT stuff and entrepreneurial thing, and you're combining the two, which I think is awesome. So for those that want to see more information on you, or do you have an email list? Do you have, I know you have the Instagram, email, how can people reach out to you and ask more questions, and kind of just, learn a little bit more from you and get better ideas of how to do more basketball rehab?
Yeah. So we have our website, the www.thebasketballdoctors.com. We're launching our first newsletter actually this upcoming week. So you could subscribe to our newsletter, where we have weekly topics, weekly blogs, and some of the podcasts that we do. Brian came out of one of the podcasts, so you'll probably see that thrown in there, a retro one. But that's where you kind of get up to date with information in regards to the stuff that we do. Also Instagram, that's kind of where we put a lot of videos on, at Basketball Docs. And then for the younger crowd that's looking, or the people, your audience that's kind of bored at home, that's on TikTok now, and that's growing. We're also on TikTok, growing. And also we're using like our podcast to interview, kind of collaborate, bring the whole health and wellness of the basketball athlete. And it's available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's just the Basketball Doctors. But if you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to email me, thebasketballdoctors@gmail.com. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. You guys heard him. So there's lots of different resources that he has available. Podcasts, email, newsletter, website, Instagram. There's a lot of different options to get a hold of Marco. Marco, I really appreciate you coming on Brian's Corner. It was great chatting with you. Look forward to just staying in touch and collaborating more in the future, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on, man. It's crazy. Looked at this website a couple years ago, like it's been 5 years ago, and now we're in it. It's crazy.
Yeah,
What a journey.
that's what it's all about, man. So, it's fun to collaborate and to keep talking with clinicians, and I'm sure we'll be doing this with younger ones and older ones in the future too.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on, man.
For sure. Take care.